On the evening of December 24th, 2001, a 48-year-old businessman named Kevin Butler was in his kitchen inside of his home in Dallas, Texas, preparing food. The following day, he was going to bring this food to a Christmas party at his friend's house. He heard his friend Larry, who spent a lot of time at his house, call to him from down the hall. And so Kevin said, "Okay, be there in a second." But then, after washing off his hands and beginning to walk down the hall to go see Larry, Kevin heard another sound. He heard the sound of two men's voices coming from outside of his house. The men sounded drunk, and they sounded like they were literally in his front yard. Kevin thought he recognized the voices. And so instinctively, Kevin flew over to the door and whipped it open. It was Johnny Serna, one of Kevin's former employees, and Daniel Torres, who was Johnny's half-brother. Kevin was immediately so mad. For several months, Kevin and Johnny had been in this very public feud over money. Johnny at one point had even tried to steal from Kevin by forging a check. And so now Kevin looked right at Johnny and Daniel and goes, "Oh, what are you guys here to steal from me again?" Johnny didn't say anything. He just charged forward and punched Kevin square in the face. Johnny and Daniel had pummeled him to the ground and were kicking and punching him, and then they dragged him further into his house and slammed the door behind him. Kevin continued to try to get away, but he just couldn't. One of the brothers was holding him down, and then before long, one of the others had gone off and come back with electrical cord, and they tied him up. The brothers went into the kitchen, got knives, came back, and they began stabbing Kevin over and over and over again. And as all this commotion was happening out in the living room, Kevin's friend Larry, who was right down the hall, as he heard the sound of Kevin screaming out for help, Larry jumped into action and he flew down the hallway and he saw Daniel still on top of Kevin stabbing him, and Larry just went right after Daniel. Larry was unarmed and really didn't stand much of a chance to begin with, but he did whatever he could to try to get Daniel off. He began biting and scratching him, but it wasn't enough. And eventually, Daniel overpowered Larry. Johnny and Daniel were not just stabbing Kevin, but were also stabbing Larry. And so in the end, both Kevin and Larry, the two friends, were stabbed to death. And then after they were dead, Johnny and Daniel fled the scene. But what the two half-brothers didn't know was that even though they had just killed Larry, Larry had actually just made sure those two brothers would get caught. Because when Larry tried to fight Daniel off, he had literally bit Daniel and gotten Daniel's blood on his mouth. And ultimately, when the police showed up, they took the blood from Larry's mouth, and that was DNA evidence, and it led them right to Daniel. Daniel and Johnny were soon arrested and charged with murder. However, they were only charged with one murder. And that's because during the attack, when Larry flew down the hall to try to protect Kevin, well, he literally flew. Larry was Kevin's pet cockatoo, and he was named after Larry Bird. Kevin had adopted Larry 2 years earlier, and the two had become like best friends. And so when Larry heard his best friend Kevin being attacked, he flew in to try to help, and he wound up clawing and pecking at Daniel's head, ultimately getting Daniel's blood on his beak, which led to their arrest. Daniel Torres and Johnny Serna were both ultimately convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison.